If you're listening to this late at night, maybe alone, with the lights already dimmed, take a moment before we begin. Some stories are meant to be heard. Others are meant to be endured. This one is about time and what it takes from you when you stop paying attention. Lena didn't notice the countdown at first. The living room was too loud, too crowded, too alive. Music shook the walls, bass vibrating through the floorboards and into her bones. Bodies pressed together in a blur of heat and motion. Champagne spilled freely, soaking into the carpet, splashing up onto bare ankles and forgotten shoes. The air smelled of alcohol, perfume, and sweat, mingling in a way that made her head swim with dizziness. She laughed harder than she had in months, harder than she remembered ever laughing. 10, 9, confetti clung to her hair. Someone shouted her name from across the room, their voice slurred and distorted by music. She raised her cup, catching the eye of a stranger, smiling like she meant it. Her heart felt light, but a small, nagging part of her wondered why it had been so long since she had truly felt this carefree. 8, 7. She hadn't wanted to come tonight. She almost stayed home, almost convinced herself another quiet year was acceptable. But someone had insisted, said it was New Year, said it mattered. Now she let herself get lost in the music and the warmth of the crowd. 6, 5. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. A tiny flicker of unease passed over her, but it dissolved in the next beat of the music. 4, 3. The room screamed together. Every laugh, every cheer, every glass clinking against another made her feel dizzy, and suspended between something she wanted to remember and something she didn't want to face. 2, 1, midnight. The room exploded in cheers, kisses, shouts, shattered glass, confetti cannons bursting overhead. Lena spun slowly, dizzy, laughing, warm and unsteady, feeling something dangerously close to happiness. Someone pressed a fresh drink into her hand, stronger than the last, sweet enough that she didn't question it. She drank. Then fragments of the night began to slip away. She leaned against a wall that felt like it was breathing. Her laughter grew sharp and hollow. Her vision blurred. She felt herself being guided down a hallway she didn't recognize. Her phone slipped from her fingers and skidded across the floor, glowing briefly before falling dark. A door closed behind her. Darkness. When Lena woke, the silence was the first thing she noticed. No music, no voices, just a slow, steady dripping sound. Her head screamed in protest as she tried to move. Pain flared in her wrists, sharp and immediate. Her ankles ached, numb and burning at the same time. She opened her eyes. A concrete ceiling stared back at her. A single exposed bulb swung gently overhead, flickering just enough to make the shadows crawl. The room smelled of rust, damp stone, and something faintly rotten. Panic hit her like a wave. She tried to sit up. Plastic restraints bit into her wrists, digging deep enough that she felt warmth slide down her forearms. Her ankles were bound to the legs of a heavy steel chair, feet barely brushing the floor. "Hello," her voice cracked. The word echoed back, thin and useless. She pulled harder, screaming as the restraints cut deeper. The chair screeched across the concrete, the sound sharp and unbearable in the quiet. Then the television clicked on. An old, boxy screen sat on a rusted table directly in front of her. Static hissed. A man appeared, no mask, no distortion, just a calm, tired face staring directly into the camera. "Happy New Year, Lena," he said, her breath caught in her throat. "I want to play a game." She screamed until her throat burned raw, until her chest ached and her vision blurred with tears. The man waited patiently, watching her unravel. When she finally fell silent, gasping and shaking, he spoke again. "You spent the last year telling yourself you survived," he said. "But survival without accountability is just delay. Tonight, time will be honest with you." Images flashed across the screen. Photos of her at the party. Photos of her leaving. Photos of her phone lying abandoned on the hallway floor, screen lit. Photos of Lena alone at home weeks earlier, sitting on her bed in the dark, unread messages glowing on her phone. "You have 90 minutes, the man continued. "Every room takes something from you. If time runs out, you stay here." The restraints around her wrists snapped open. She pitched forward, hitting the floor hard, gasping for air. Behind her, a heavy metal door unlocked with a mechanical clang. Above it, a digital timer lit up. 89 minutes and 46 seconds. It began to count down. She ran. The first room was narrow and damp, lined with dripping pipes and puddles. In the center, a clear box on a pedestal contained a key, but it was ensnared in a cruel wire trap. A pair of pliers rested beside it. A note read, "Pain is part of the process. Use what is provided. Choose wisely." Her hands shook violently as she reached for the pliers, testing the tension of the wires. The metal bit into her skin, slicing a shallow line across her palm. Bile rose in her throat. Tears blurred her vision. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to lift the pliers, carefully bending the wire until the key was free. Each movement was excruciating, her fingers bleeding, trembling with fear and pain. The timer ticked down relentlessly, 85 minutes and 12 seconds. She staggered to the next door, key clutched tightly, and unlocked it. The second room was bathed in a sickly red glow. A heavy chair sat on a platform above a pit of retractable spikes. A note read, "Sit, endure the wait, survive the memory." Hallucinations flickered in the mirror above the chair, faces of people she had hurt, whispers of past failures. She stepped onto the platform carefully, sitting on the chair exactly as required, feeling the spikes pressing upward, but stopping short of piercing her flesh. The platform lowered slowly, forcing her to confront every mistake, every unspoken apology, every moment she had ignored. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the platform released her, leaving her shaking but alive. The timer showed 63 minutes and 40 seconds. The next chamber was sterile and white, mist curling along the floor. 2 keys lay on a table. Only one opened the next door. The other would trap her. Each second seemed to drag, her hallucinations intensifying. Faces of friends and strangers accusing, memories of lies, betrayals, and missed opportunities. She took a deep, shuddering breath, chose the key that felt right, and inserted it into the lock. A satisfying click echoed, and the door swung open. The timer read 21 minutes and 50 seconds. She forced herself upright, knowing that the next sequence of challenges awaited, each more gruesome and punishing than the last. Every heartbeat stretched into unbearable tension, every breath a battle for survival. Lena stepped through the door she had unlocked, her body trembling and bruised, sweat and blood mixing along her arms. The corridor beyond was narrow and dimly lit, the concrete walls slick with condensation. A low, metallic hum resonated through the floor, vibrating up into her legs. Mist curled along the ground, thick enough that her ankles disappeared from view as she took each tentative step. The timer above the next door blinked relentlessly, 21 minutes and 48 seconds. Ahead, she saw the first new challenge, a series of shallow pits, each filled with water and floating shards of glass. Above each pit hung a heavy metal chain, its end attached to a sharp, curved spike. A note scrawled in blood-red ink. Each step is measured. Choose wrongly, and it will remind you of your life's mistakes. Her heart pounded as she assessed the layout. One wrong step would tear her skin or impale her legs. The mist swirled around her feet, concealing some shards and revealing others with every flicker of the overhead lights. She gritted her teeth, remembering the traps she had just survived, and forced herself forward. Each step was excruciatingly slow. The spikes above her swayed, scraping against the walls and dripping condensation that stung her face. Her hands, still raw from the pliers room, trembled as she extended them for balance. Shadows shifted in the mist, forming faces she recognized, or thought she did, accusing her of every failure she had ignored over the past year. Every memory of lies, missed calls, and betrayals flashed before her eyes, amplified by the surreal echoes in the empty chamber. Minutes stretched interminably. The timer blinked down, 19 minutes and 36 seconds. Her legs burned, muscles quivering, yet she pressed on. The water in the pits sloshed as she navigated across, shards grazing her feet, drawing fresh blood that mingled with the mist. A sudden hiss from above made her flinch. A spike swung close, missing by mere inches. She bit back a scream, forcing her body forward despite the panic clawing at her chest. The corridor narrowed, funneling her toward a raised platform. Suspended from the ceiling above it were dozens of hooks dripping with a viscous, dark liquid. The floor around the platform was scattered with brittle bones, each one an ominous warning. A note read, "Step on the platform, survive the hooks, and endure the pain. Hesitation is death." She approached, legs shaking uncontrollably. The platform creaked under her weight, each step threatening to trigger one of the hooks. Hallucinations intensified. The walls now seemed to breathe, faces appearing and dissolving as whispers of forgotten apologies and betrayals filled her ears. Her palms were slick with sweat and blood as she grasped the edges of the platform, forcing herself to keep moving despite the fear screaming in every nerve. Minutes dragged. The timer above the next door blinked relentlessly. 16 minutes and 52 seconds. Lena's mind teetered between clarity and collapse. Each second stretched into an eternity. She inched forward, feeling one hook graze her shoulder, slicing through the thin fabric of her shirt and scratching the skin beneath. Pain shot up her arm, but she forced herself onward, tears mixing with the blood and mist. Finally, she reached the other side. She collapsed on the cold concrete floor, chest heaving, arms trembling, staring at the door ahead. The timer read 14 minutes and 23 seconds. Every muscle ached, every breath burned, but she knew she couldn't linger. She pushed herself upright and approached the next challenge, a room completely dark except for a faint green glow at the far end. Inside, the floor was covered with loose tiles, some of which concealed deep pits with razor-sharp spikes at the bottom. A faint whisper echoed, "Choose your path wisely. One wrong move, and you remain in darkness forever." Lena's hands hovered just above the tiles, testing for stability. Hallucinations danced before her eyes, shadows of herself screaming, pleading for release, faces of friends and strangers twisted in silent judgment. Each step she took was a negotiation between fear and survival, every inch a battle against panic. The timer ticked down, 12 minutes and 45 seconds. Her legs burned, knees threatening to buckle. She forced herself forward, careful, meticulous, inch by inch. Her hands bled from scraping against jagged edges as she probed each tile, testing before stepping. Each correct choice allowed her a momentary reprieve. Each misstep drew a jolt of pain, punishing her in small but sharp doses, reminding her how fragile her body and mind had become. She finally reached the end of the room, the faint green glow revealing a small, rusted door. Every nerve screamed exhaustion, yet she forced herself to stand, trembling. The timer read 10 minutes and 31 seconds. She inserted her trembling hands into the handle, turning it carefully. The door creaked open, revealing the next chamber. Relief surged, but only briefly. Lena stepped through the door she had unlocked, her body trembling and bruised, sweat and blood coating her arms. The corridor beyond was narrow, the concrete walls slick with condensation, and a low metallic hum vibrated up through her legs. Mist curled along the floor, clinging to her ankles. Above the next door, the timer blinked, 10 minutes and 31 seconds. The next room yawned open like a maw of darkness. The door closed. A sickly yellow light illuminated the far end, revealing the horrifying challenge. The ceiling was filled with long, jagged spikes, slowly descending toward the floor. The floor itself was covered with large, red letters scattered in a grid. A note scrawled in crimson ink read, "Step on the letters in the correct order, or the ceiling will remind you why hesitation is deadly." Lena's heart pounded. Her palms were slick with sweat and blood, and hallucinations flickered along the walls, faces of those she had wronged, eyes accusing, mouths whispering betrayals. Every instinct screamed to run, but the spikes were inching lower with every passing second. She studied the letters. Panic clawed at her mind. Some letters glowed faintly in the flickering light, others seemed distorted, like reflections in broken glass. She realized she had to spell a word, one that felt instinctively correct. Escape she whispered, testing the word on her lips. Her mind raced, trying to memorize the path through the letters, while the spikes slowly crept closer. Her first step onto a letter triggered a small click, and the spikes shivered slightly. She froze, feeling the pulse of fear, realizing her path might be wrong. She tried again, moving carefully to the next letter. Each step required painstaking precision. One mistake could accelerate the ceiling's descent. Sweat ran into her eyes as she forced herself to think clearly, recalling fragments of memory and intuition. Hallucinations intensified. Shadows of herself clawing at the floor, ghostly whispers repeating the letters she had chosen and then rejecting them. Her legs shook violently, arms extended to balance. She tested, retracted, tested again, and finally began to step with certainty. Each correct letter slowed the spikes slightly, giving her tiny reprieves of breathing space. The ceiling hovered just above her head, metallic tips inches from her hair. Her heart pounded painfully, and every nerve screamed. She finally stepped onto the last letter. A loud metallic click reverberated through the room. The ceiling halted. She collapsed to the floor, trembling violently, chest heaving. Relief was fleeting. The far wall slid open with a hiss, revealing the next chamber. The timer above the door read 8 minutes and 52 seconds. This room was wide, circular, and lined with jagged metal spikes protruding from the walls and ceiling. Suspended in the center was a steel cage, just large enough for her to fit, with a shallow pool of black liquid at its base. A note at the entrance read, "To proceed, you must enter the cage. Your resolve will be tested." Her stomach twisted in fear. Hallucinations erupted as she stepped forward, distorted versions of herself screaming, faces of people she had neglected crowding the walls, accusing and judging. She forced herself toward the cage, each step painstakingly careful to avoid the jagged spikes. She climbed into the cage. Instantly, mechanisms activated. The cage began to lower toward the black liquid. Painful electric shocks surged if she touched the cage walls, forcing her to stay perfectly still. Her arms and legs trembled violently. She tasted blood in her mouth, and her chest ached with every forced breath. The timer above the next door ticked down, 5 minutes and 48 seconds. Inside the cage, hallucinations intensified. She saw distorted versions of herself trapped, clawing at the bars. Shadows of those she had neglected filled the room, silent and accusing. Time stretched unbearably. Every second felt like an eternity. She saw a glimmer of something shiny in the black liquid. She plunged her hands into the black liquid to retrieve a lever that would unlock the exit. Pain shot through her as submerged spikes brushed against her palms. She screamed, biting her lip, tasting copper. Finally, she grasped the lever and pulled. The cage rose slightly, locking the exit door open. Lena staggered through the exit of the cage room, limbs trembling, dripping black liquid onto the concrete floor. The timer above the next door blinked, 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Her chest heaved, every muscle screaming, yet she forced herself forward. The next chamber yawned open like a nightmare made real. The walls were lined with shallow pools of dark, oily water. In the center hung dozens of pendulum blades, swinging lazily at first, then faster, as if sensing her approach. A note scrawled in dark ink read, "To survive, you must reach the other side. Timing is life. One mistake is death." Her stomach twisted with fear. Hallucinations clawed at her mind. Faces of friends and strangers, distorted and accusing, their whispers echoing with every heartbeat. Her legs shook violently, yet she had no choice but to move. She had to watch the swinging blades, counting their rhythm, every step a calculated gamble. One wrong move, and the blade would sever flesh, maybe even bone. The timer ticked down, 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Sweat and blood ran down her arms as she lunged forward, narrowly avoiding the first few blades. A blade nicked her calf, sharp pain radiating, making her stumble, but she forced herself onward. Her hallucinations intensified, shadows reaching for her, echoing every regret she had ever buried. She found herself at a platform with pressure plates that triggered additional blades. Her mind raced. She had to memorize the safe path quickly, reading the subtle differences in the worn floor, the faint scuff marks indicating previous trials, or perhaps tricks of her imagination. She inched across, balancing on the narrow safe zones, breath ragged, heart hammering. Each step felt like minutes. The timer showed 1 minute and 58 seconds. Her legs were burning, arms trembling. A blade swung dangerously close, grazing her shoulder. Blood spattered across the oily floor. Panic clawed at her, but she focused, repeating a mantra to herself. Survive, survive, survive. She leapt across the final plates, narrowly avoiding a swinging pendulum that would have crushed her chest. Ahead, a heavy steel door stood slightly ajar, light spilling from the outside. Lena forced her legs to move faster, ignoring the pain, ignoring the hallucinations, ignoring the world shrinking to nothing but this one goal. She reached the door, lungs burning, vision blurred, fingers slick with blood and oil. She pushed with every ounce of strength she had left. The door creaked open, sunlight, or perhaps the faint yellow glow of an exit flooding her eyes. She stumbled through, collapsing on the ground outside the nightmare. Her body shook violently, covered in sweat, blood, and grime. The timer above the last exit had just hit 0. Shaking, bruised, and still trembling, Lena ran to the nearest police station. Her story poured out in frantic words, describing the rooms, the spikes, the cages, and the man who had orchestrated it all. Officers scribbled notes, their faces serious, and quickly organized a search. They followed Lena back to the location, and to her disbelief, the building was still there, every trap, every room exactly as she had described. The ceiling spikes, the swinging pendulums, the cage with black liquid, all intact, ominous and ready. Police officers cautiously moved through the rooms, cataloging the horrors with careful precision, taking photos and notes, confirming that the nightmare she had endured was real. Lena walked behind them, trembling, tears streaking her bloodied face, her chest heaving with exhaustion. The man who had orchestrated the torment was nowhere to be found, vanished into the shadows. If you enjoyed this terrifying journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more horror stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Comment below with your thoughts. Could you survive what Lena faced? Turn on notifications so you never miss a chilling tale. And remember, stay vigilant. You never know what horrors might be lurking in the shadows of the new year.
Let's play a game.